One more thing, I want to acknowledge the students of Professor Ifill's seminar who have played a critical role in pulling this event together. And you'll see them actually throughout the day helping to guide the program, and you'll also hear from them directly. In fact, you're going to hear from one of them right now. So to get us started, it is my pleasure to introduce the 71st president of the Howard University School of Law Bar Association, Mr. Jake Smith IV.
All right, good morning. Welcome to Howard University School of Law. My name is Jake Smith IV, and this year I've had the honor and privilege of serving as the 71st Student Bar Association president. For those of you guys who aren't familiar, that's just the president here at the School of Law for the student body. But more importantly, this morning I have the privilege of welcoming you all to the 14th Amendment Annual Symposium, this year's theme being the next refounding. I cannot think of a name more fitting for a moment like this. But to understand what it means to refound a democracy and to recognize that we might be living through a refounding, we must first understand what a refounding is and understand the first refounding. This year, I've had the opportunity to be one of the few students taking the 14th Amendment class titled Reimagining American Democracy, taught by none other than Professor Sherrilyn Ifill. And yes, originally I absolutely took this class because it's taught by an absolute icon, a legend, a career civil rights attorney, the former president of the NAACP, and someone who may not know it, but who has absolutely volunteered to give me lifelong advice and to tell me stories for the rest of my life. But more than that, my peers and I took this course because we're excited. We're excited about the possibility of another refounding of American democracy. But to understand where we're going, it is imperative that we understand where we have been. And to reimagine American democracy, we must understand what is the most consequential amendment to the United States Constitution. To understand the 14th Amendment, we must begin with its truth. The 14th Amendment was a response. It was a response to President Andrew Johnson's veto of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It was a response to nationwide Black harm, and it was a response to the nation's refusal to allow the Reconstruction era to actually reconstruct. The 14th Amendment was also a compromise. The drafters of the 14th Amendment did not get everything they wanted. Black Americans certainly did not get everything they wanted, and women didn't get anything at all. In fact, there's a clear argument that women ended up with less as a result of the 14th Amendment. So when we read its language and we ask why certain protections were limited, why certain words were included and others were not, it's imperative that we understand the constraints, the politics, and the unfinished vision embedded within the 14th Amendment. The Reconstruction Amendments did not emerge from victory alone. They emerged from resistance, organized and unrelenting, and at times maybe unafraid, resistance that's in pursuit of equity and equality. And it's that tension between promise and resistance that is not confined to the past. It is the story of the 14th Amendment, and it is the story of American democracy. It is the challenge before us today. So if this is indeed a moment of refounding, and to be clear, I'm most certain that it is, then the question is not simply what we will build, but whether we are prepared to confront the same forces that limited the first refounding. Whether we are willing to move beyond compromise and towards fulfillment, and whether we are ready to complete the work that was started but never finished. That is why gatherings like this matter. That is why symposiums matter, because the next refounding, if it is worthy of its name, will require not just reflection, but audacity, not just memory, but imagination, and not just scholarship, but zealous advocacy. So welcome to Howard University School of Law. Thank you all for being a part of this work, and please join me in welcoming the Dean of Howard University School of Law, Dean Roger A. Fairfax.
Thank you, Jake. Good morning. Come on, we could do better than that. We are here at the 14th Amendment Center for Law and Democracy, the second annual symposium. Good morning. All right, it is great to see you all here. As Jake said, my name is Roger A. Fairfax Jr., and I have the privilege of serving as dean of this historic law school. And it was great to see some of you yesterday evening at the reception, and you are in for an extraordinary day of programming here. You know, we here at Howard Law are so very blessed to have on our faculty Professor Sherrilyn Ifill, who teaches our students and indeed our entire community about the legislative history of the 14th Amendment and what motivated those founders in 1868. And yes, as Professor Ifill always reminds us, they were founders in 1868. What motivated them to adopt those 425 words in 5 sections that not only amended a constitution, but reimagined a nation. An amendment that did so much beyond its familiar first section. An amendment that gave Congress the power and indeed the moral responsibility to act, to implement its protections. A call that would go unanswered by our national legislature from 1875 until the late 1950s. And we at the Howard University School of Law are thrilled to host Professor Ifill's extraordinary interdisciplinary 14th Amendment Center. Indeed, we're an institution founded on January 6th. January 6th, the good one, not that one, but the good one of which our nation can be proud. January 6th, 1869, just 181 days after the ratification of the 14th Amendment. And Howard Law alumni and faculty, giants such as Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and Oliver Hill and Pauli Murray and Spotswood Robinson and James Nabrett and Dovey Johnson Roundtree and George E.C. Hayes and Robert Carter and Gabrielle Kirk McDonald, just to name a few. They've been some of the fiercest defenders of the promise of the 14th Amendment over the past 157 years. Today's symposium will be engaging the work, the opportunities, and the challenges, and the charge that each and every one of us, individuals and entities, must take up in the weeks, the months, and the years ahead to assure that the 14th Amendment is not a dead letter. The sessions to come will explore many of the themes of the center's work, including in law and policy, education and curriculum, art, narrative, and imagination, and democratic institutions. So I ask you to prepare for a day of robust engagement reflecting the brilliance of the many participants on this amazing agenda. But before we begin, I have to say a few words about the thought leader. The force of nature, the life force, you all know her. The person who brought this project to fruition and brought it to the Howard University School of Law. As the immediate past leader of the nation's premier civil rights legal organization, Sherrilyn Ifill is an heir to the legacy of Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley and Jack Greenberg and Elaine Jones and others who led LDF's struggle for civil rights and equal justice under law in this country, who were responsible for winning and later implementing the landmark Brown versus Board of Education ruling in the Supreme Court. Sherrilyn began her legal career as a fellow at the ACLU before joining the staff of LDF, where she litigated voting rights cases. She then left LDF to join the faculty of the University of Maryland School of Law. In over 2 decades there, she taught civil procedure and constitutional law to thousands of law students. And she pioneered a series of innovative legal clinics focused on criminal justice, environmental justice, and racial justice. She's also a prolific scholar who has published academic articles in leading law journals and op-eds and commentaries in leading newspapers. Her book, On the Courthouse Lawn, Confronting the Legacy of Lynching in the 21st Century, was highly acclaimed and is credited with laying the foundation for contemporary conversations about lynching and reconciliation. Her latest project is a book about race and the current crisis in American democracy entitled, Is This America?, which will be published by Penguin Press. As the 7th president and director counsel at LDF from 2013 to 2022, Professor Ifill played a prominent role in shaping our national conversation about race and civil rights. She led LDF in groundbreaking litigation in the areas of voting rights, economic justice, and education, and took a prominent role in confronting police violence against unarmed Black people. She raised the profile of LDF, growing the organization in staff, resources, and influence. She's the recipient of numerous honorary doctorates, including from New York University, American University, Bard College, and Fordham Law School. And she has received prestigious awards such as the Radcliffe Medal, the Brandeis Medal, and the American Bar Association's Thurgood Marshall Award. She has been inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and has been named by both Time Magazine and Glamour Magazine as one of their Women of the Year, and by American Lawyer Magazine as Attorney of the Year, and then again by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. She serves on the board of the Mellon Foundation, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Board of Trustees of the NYU School of Law, and is a senior fellow of the Ford Foundation, and also served on President Biden's Commission on the Supreme Court. And most importantly, from my perspective, she is the inaugural holder of the Vernon L. Jordan Endowed Chair in Civil Rights at the Howard University School of Law. So friends, if you are able, please stand and join me in welcoming and saluting the founder and leader of the 14th Amendment Center for Law and Democracy at the Howard University School of Law, Professor Sherrilyn Ifill.
Sit down, sit down, sit down. Oh my God, he went full church. The bishop came in, everybody stood up. Not necessary at all. I am so thrilled to see you all here today and so thrilled to be doing this work. And I know that Dean Fairfax has to run out, and I just want to thank him for his stewardship of Howard, which has been so tremendous over the last 2 years, for being so supportive of my efforts to begin to build this center. Some of you had the opportunity to come up to the center offices last night and see how beautiful they are. You've met some of the fantastic students I have this year, but we're gonna figure this out because I keep teaching this course to third-year students, and so I have them and then they leave. But I just really wanna thank Dean Fairfax for his support. This really is a labor of love, this effort to do this work, and to do this work in this time. And I do feel the need to acknowledge, first and foremost, the tension of this time. I don't think it makes sense for us to come together, to convene, to see one another, and to pretend that we are not in a moment of profound crisis. And that moment of crisis is ever present in our minds, no matter what we're doing. It's like a weight. We feel it. If you're teaching at this law school and you're preparing young people to be lawyers, you're encouraging them to believe that this is a profession that matters. You're encouraging them to believe that their future in this country is bright. If you have children or grandchildren, you are looking them in the face and telling them that you believe in the promise of their lives in this country, that they can achieve anything, that their achievements will be recognized, that they will not be denigrated in their achievements. And every day we fight a struggle to hold the line on that. And that takes a lot of energy out of all of us. So we're tired, we're sad. I admit that I am grieving for what will not be. Some of us are frightened. I am not, but some of us are, understandably. Some of us are just on a slow burn, angry. I am. But all of it takes a lot of energy out of us. And therefore, it means a lot to me when we come together, that we take a moment and acknowledge that we're doing the same thing. We're not just coming in here happy-go-lucky, eating bagels and drinking coffee. We are carrying something incredibly heavy. And it's okay to acknowledge that. But it's only okay if we're also willing to acknowledge that with that weight comes a different kind of responsibility that is itself heavy, but can feel wonderful. And it is the opportunity for us to link arms with those of us who are committed to living in a democracy that recognizes the dignity of all people, that believes in the concept of equality, that believes in truth, the importance of history, and that when we link arms together, we recognize that this moment always also carries with it the opportunity to build the world we always wanted. Only as this unravels will we have the opportunity to begin afresh. Some of you may be longing for days past. Some of you may be thinking about the 90s. Okay, I do think about the R&B music, I'm not lying. Neo-soul, yes. 70s soul music, absolutely, wish we could go back. I am not nostalgic for any time in the past. I've been a civil rights lawyer for 35 years. I have never lacked for work. There has been injustice, racial inequality, wealth inequality, violence, cruelty to some segments of our population for my entire life. I'm not nostalgic for any period. But what I am is excited about the possibility that in this moment, as the current infrastructure unravels, we have the opportunity to create the world that we wanted. I want the beloved community. I want the America I dreamed of as a girl, born of the powerful witness of those participants in the civil rights movement. I feel ambitious in this moment. And that's what I try to impart to my students. Not a sense of defeat, a sense of strength in confronting the moment and a strength of possibility on the other side of this moment. And the inspiration for that, the reason I know I'm right, the reason I have no sense of doubt is because it happened before. It's because this country was refounded after fracture. My hope is that we can do it without the actual war and 600,000 people dead. I think we can. There are wars and wars. They're not all hot. But it was done before. People came together to create a new nation. And it's important for us to recognize that in this year when we purport to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of our nation. It's important for us to remember that we've had two foundings. And that the first founding, the one that we laud, the one with the folks with the tricorn hats and the flutes, the ones about which they have made Broadway plays and 6-part documentaries and many, 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 many books. That was the first founding, and that founding was profoundly flawed. We did not emerge from that founding after 1789 as a democracy. We did not emerge from that period as a country that was steeped in the concept of equality. In fact, the word equality does not appear in our Constitution until the 14th Amendment in 1868. We know the first Constitution was not a document of equality because it included a clause that said that enslaved people would be counted as 3/5 of a person. It included a clause that allowed the international slave trade, or America's participation in it, to continue until 1808. So we know the first Constitution was not a document of equality. And we know it was not a democracy, because we know that most people couldn't vote. So, it's okay to celebrate what was good about that first founding. And there were some incredible things that go deep into our national character and some extraordinary individuals involved in that founding. But we cannot rightly laud that without also lauding the second founding and those founders and framers who had to do the cleanup work for the first founders. They had to create a constitution that integrated the Black population that was in this country. They had to create a constitution that raised up the concept and principle of equality. They had to reach back over the first Constitution to the Declaration of Independence, which stated, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." And thereafter, a document was created, the first Constitution, that rejected equality. So the second founders had to reach back over that document and go back to the Declaration and pull the concept of equality for the first time into our Constitution. And they had to make corrections. They had to overturn the 3/5 clause, and they did that in Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. They had to overturn the Dred Scott decision, and they did that with birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment. So they had to clean up the work that had been undone. They had to right all of the compromises of the first Constitution, and then they had to create an infrastructure for a new beginning. And that's the work that's going to be before us on the other side of this. So we simply don't have the room to despair. In 1866, Frederick Douglass wrote an essay that appeared in the Atlantic magazine called Reconstruction. His focus was to encourage Congress, whose hand in Reconstruction had been strengthened by the outcome of the 1866 election, to go even further. They had passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which created birthright citizenship and a set of protections for Black people that those founders, those members of the Congress, the radical Republicans in Congress, believed would be necessary to allow Black people to exercise full citizenship. They'd passed that statute, and that statute had been vetoed by the then President Andrew Johnson, who I used to call the worst president in our history. I used to call him that. He vetoed that legislation, and there was real concern about it, because it was also an election year. Would the radical Republicans hold Congress? Would they hold the majority? Would American voters endorse what they were trying to do in Reconstruction? And they did win in that November 1866 election. And for Frederick Douglass, this meant they had a license to go all the way. And so Douglass was writing to encourage them not to let up. He had met with Andrew Johnson, the president, early in 1866 and was devastated to learn from that encounter that Johnson was an unrepentant white supremacist who fully intended to return Southern insurrectionists to control of the South and to thwart the potential for Black citizenship. He was also profoundly uncharming. Douglass urged that Congress, the 39th Congress entering their second session, to reject President Johnson's conception of Reconstruction. He urged them to not welcome back Southern insurrectionists with open arms. He urged Congress to go even further than they had with the Civil Rights Act. He asked them to protect Black citizenship, which for Douglass, he explicitly stated, meant ensuring Black voting rights. This is 1866, before the 14th Amendment has been drafted. He issues one of the many pleas he made to include Black voting rights. And he asked Congress to do this in this essay in The Atlantic. He says, "So that the work this time shall finally be done." I chose that as the name for this conference as a way of framing the discussions we're going to have today. I mean to encourage us to intentionally imagine the work we'll need to do to complete the creation of an infrastructure that will support multiracial, healthy democracy in this country. I contend that we did not have democracy in this country until at least 1954, when Brown versus Board of Education was decided, because of course, prior to 1954, the first half of the 20th century, half of the country was governed by legal apartheid, and that can't be a democracy. Some people say not till the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but in any case, we're a very young democracy. And even in our youth, we have largely been unhealthy. The moment that we're in asks much of us. Like you, I wake up every day and I wonder what fresh hell awaits. I wake up every day grieving and wondering all the things I have to do. Should we march? Should we write? Should we protest? Should we speak truth to power? Should we boycott? All of the above. But I created the 14th Amendment Center so that we would also have a place to contemplate, to plan, to strategize, to study the creation of the vision of a new democracy in this country, a place where, using the 14th Amendment as a guide, we can imagine how this time the work might finally be done. We should remember that the founders, the refounders of our nation, created a constitutional and statutory infrastructure that they believed held out the possibility for true democracy in this country. 3 constitutional amendments: the Freedmen's Bureau, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the Ku Klux Klan Acts of 1870 and 1871, the creation of the Department of Justice in 1870 to give federal authority and ability to prosecute Klan violence against Black people, the Civil Rights Act of 1875. That is not a bad lineup for 10 years. A constitutional and statutory infrastructure for democracy. You also know that within 20 years, that infrastructure was either dismantled or hollowed out by congressional inaction, by rampant white supremacist violence, and by the Supreme Court. It took ordinary Black people, civil rights lawyers and activists, to fight for that vision and revive it 60 years later during the civil rights movement. And they too created an infrastructure: the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Not bad for 14 years of a movement in which leader after leader after leader was murdered. The lives of many of us in this room, myself included, we owe to that refounding work of those courageous Americans and the infrastructure they created, where many of us live, who many of us were permitted to marry, where many of us were permitted to go to school, where many of us have been permitted to work, was all the creation of what those people did in those 14 years. Now, once again, that infrastructure is being dismantled in real time by congressional inaction, by violence, whether January 6th or police violence with impunity or masked kidnappers, and of course, by the Supreme Court. So on the other side of this moment, what must we do, learning from the errors of the past? What must we do that the work this time shall finally be done? Today, we're going to speak through the 4 pillars of the 14th Amendment Center. The first pillar, of course, is law and policy. This is, after all, a law school, and law is critical to setting the infrastructure for democracy, as is policy. Policy are the decisions we make about where we're going to invest our dollars, our time, and our values as a society. That's what policy is. And so one of the pillars is law and policy. The second pillar is education and curriculum. Far too few Americans know about the 14th Amendment, what it means, what it promises, what it protects, the way it was supposed to reset our nation, the history of the refounding of this nation, and therefore we lack critical knowledge that we need to be able to evaluate the moment that we're in and to be able to imagine how we go forward. Most lawyers will admit that they only learned two sections of the 14th Amendment, Section 1 and Section 5. I never learned Section 2, never learned Section 3, never learned Section 4. Most people, lawyers, learned Section 3 because of the case in the Supreme Court 2 years ago when they were seeking to remove President Trump from the ballot. That was the Section 3 case. And I'm betting that's the first time that most of the justices on the Supreme Court read the full Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And Donald Sherman, the lawyer who helped litigate that case, is sitting back there grinning. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So most of us, even lawyers, don't even know about the power of this amendment. And so education and curriculum is important, and I go around the country teaching people about the 14th Amendment, teaching a lot of judges about the 14th Amendment, teaching students K through 12, teaching teachers who can then teach about the 14th Amendment. The third pillar is art and imagination. And people ask me all the time, why? Because an infrastructure is not only created by law, it's also created by narrative. And one of the things we lost after the Civil War was the narrative war. We won all the laws, we won the victory on the field, but the South won the story. They created a mythology of their own nobility called the Lost Cause. They created a project for building monuments around the country to people who had been traitors to the Union, leaders of the Confederacy. The Daughters of the Confederacy created a textbook project that ensured that American textbooks told stories about the Confederacy and the Civil War that were sympathetic to the South and to slavery. They had a scholarly aspect to it with the Dunning School at Columbia University, where historians also bought into this lost cause narrative and created scholarly work that came to define what Reconstruction was about, that came to hold this narrative that Reconstruction was a period of corruption, that Reconstruction failed, when in fact Reconstruction was destroyed. They also created images. They created pictures. I was just looking at them yesterday because yesterday was the anniversary of the surrender at Appomattox. And if you look at any picture of the surrender at Appomattox, you will notice several things. You will notice that General Robert E. Lee is very tall and upright. And you will notice that Ulysses Grant, it's very small and almost dejected and almost appears to be the supplicant. He is the winner. But all of the art of that famous surrender shows Grant kind of bowing almost before Lee. And so even the artwork was designed to transmit this story. This time, we have to attend to the narrative. We won the narrative in the Civil Rights Movement. That's why we have laws now that are trying to turn back the teaching of that narrative. That's why we have laws that are trying to denigrate the heroes of that period, because we did win the narrative. Not just in this country, but around the world, the Civil Rights Movement was seen as kind of the noblest movement in this country's history. And then the final pillar is democratic institutions, because institutions hold the narrative, the values, the law. And by institutions, I don't just mean law institutions. I mean political institutions. I mean political parties. I mean artistic institutions. I mean universities. I mean our business institutions. All of those institutions as well have to hold the conception of democracy in this country. And so we're going to talk today throughout the program through those 4 pillars. You're also going to hear from my amazing students about some of the work they've been doing this semester. And I'm going to say a word about those students just because they're so great. Howard students are unique, and I'm sure you've heard about it and you think that it's like, you know, a myth and an old wives' tale, but I've taught at a lot of law schools, and I've loved all my students. I love my students at Maryland. I love my students at Harvard. I mean, love, love, love. But there is something special about Howard students. You guys are just amazing. You're amazing. Not only are they brilliant, what I always say when people ask me, well, what's the difference teaching at Howard? And I always say, I can start at the letter L. I don't have to start at A, because they know things. And that means the conversation and the discussion can move so much further than it can in other places. They are unfailingly polite. They are perceptive. They are ambitious, which I absolutely insist upon. They're thoughtful and discerning. And it is a joy to teach them. And every time I engage with them, the sense that I feel of what is to come, of what will be in their hands, just gives me joy. But we have a responsibility as well. We cannot hand over this world to those young people and wash our hands of it. We created this mess. And by we, I mean that really loosely. I didn't create it. We have to work to the end. I'm going to do this work until I can't do it anymore. And I'm going to do that in order to create a foundation upon which these exceptional young people can run the next leg of the race, which I know that they will do. So I hope you will join me in applauding our students and this opportunity today. I hope that you will just block things out. I know that there are many things happening and people are announcing all kinds of things. We also get to study. We also get to spend time figuring things out. And that's what today is about. And we're going to begin today by trying to figure out where we stand with the Supreme Court, with our first two panels. The first panel is going to be introduced by, our students going to introduce this first panel? I'm so excited. It's going to be introduced by our students, and they're going to talk about the work that they're doing. But we're going to begin there, and then we're going to move through the day, kind of moving through our pillars to help us begin to understand this work that is before us. So I thank you all